All right, well, thanks everybody for joining. And if you're plugged into the robotics world at all, you know what a treat it is to have each of the individuals that are sitting on the stage today. The body of work and the experience is substantial. Startup, big corporate, advisement from the ASC side, all the things we're going to talk about today. And that sets up the stratification of robotics. And especially we're going to probably focus on the soft tissue side of things, giving our audience here today. And then obviously the influence that the ASC world has had and is going to have and the different formats coming out today. So if each of you can introduce yourselves and maybe share the perspective from which you'll be thinking about the questions. Right. Evelyn?
All right, my name is Evelyn T. I'm a partner at LSI LifeSciences Consultants. It's a boutique consulting company that works across the medtech and biopharma space. And we work with some of the biggest names in industry. We work mainly with strategics and investors to do growth strategies such as market assessments, due diligences, and we have deep domain expertise across a number of areas, including orthopedics, ASC channels, and robotics. I co-lead the MedTech Investor practice, and I further specialize in orthopedics, structural heart, and vascular. I look forward to being on this panel with everyone today.
Hi, Scott Huennekens, former CEO of Verb Surgical, where we did a soft tissue robot, formerly Nuvasive's board, where we were doing spine robots, Invista's board, dental robots, interventional cardiology robots, so in digital platforms. So I'm coming at it from all that now on boards of a number of cardiology surgery companies.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mike Clouthier. I lead business development for the surgical operating unit for Medtronic, which includes our open laparoscopic and robotic tools and offerings. I've been with the company almost 16 years, so from the infancy of our robotic program. And that's the perspective I'll be bringing, is kind of that big player in the market and how robotics is going to continue to evolve.
And my name is Greg Roche, CEO of Distalmotion. I've been there about 125 days. My prior 2 years I spent at Avatera Medical, so both soft tissue, multi-port robotic companies. And then the previous 4 years before that, I was responsible for launching ROSA, which is Zimmer Biomet's total knee robot. So been in robotics the last 6 or 7 years all over the world.
All right, so we're going to jump right into this, and I'm going to focus on, if you want to kick the clock, just so I know where we are in this, the stratification of robotics and soft tissue surgery. And I'm going to start, Greg, with you. You've obviously been involved with Avatera. You come from the ortho ASC side as well, and now leading Distalmotion. So what have you seen and what are you focusing on from your perspective with Distal and the leader there on this stratification?
Yeah, so I think one of the things you look at, there's really two categories. You have clinical barriers and you have economic barriers, especially when you talk about outpatient surgical hospitals or ASCs. So the learnings for me are everything matters. From a clinical perspective, to get adoption, you have to have ease of use, you have to have simple integration, you have to work around the workflow of that particular site of care versus trying to force the workflow of the tool that you're using. So that's really, really important. The other burdens from an economic perspective, obviously lower reimbursement when you move to those sites of care, so you have to be conscious of that. But inventory, space, all of those things really matter. So it's one of the reasons I ran to Distalmotion. Small form factor, perfect for outpatient, perfect for minor procedure rooms, the ability to do both high and low acuity cases. And I think we're all seeing, when you think about the patient, we have to move to these sites of care. It's just less burden on the patient, better place for them to have surgery, especially the lower acuity surgeries. So there's a lot to do, I guess, multifactorial to really understand whether or not you have a product that will fit. And again, I'll just take the learning from Zimmer. I mean, I think about 30+% of our robots in the first 3 years were in the outpatient environment. And again, all of those things we had to figure out. And you don't really think about how inventory is stored and logistics around sterilization, but all those details matter. So you have to have the perfect product to really cross those boundaries.
Scott, early days of Verb, did we even think about the stratification of robotics at that point in time in soft tissue surgery?
Yeah, I believe so. I mean, look, every market, is going to start with some generalized tool, like, the Model T, but we know we're going to end up with off-road vehicles and sports cars and all the like. So I think we're at an exciting time where, hey, there's this intuitive system that is an incredible invention, and I'm sure the newest version is going to be incredible as well. But does that fit all of these different, segments of soft tissue? Where, hey, can I offload some capacity to do this particular hernia procedure or this particular, and make it, as you talked about, more available economically to each of these different markets around the world, as well as each of these different segments clinically that also exist. So we were thinking about that and how we may end up having to have 3 robots to have a portfolio to meet all the different needs, either clinically, economically, or geographically.
And Mike, so how is Medtronic thinking about that? You put your first oar in the water with Hugo, and that architecture probably was ideated even before the ASC was thought about, candidly, being their early days. So how are you thinking of that portfolio moving forward? Is that an ASC model? Is it a hospital model? Are you going to try and split them?
Yeah, I think the idea first was to focus on the hospital market, where historically Medtronic's surgical instruments were being utilized and the surgeons were performing surgery there. So we focused the robot on applications in that area. But the modular design, I think where you're kind of going, Joe, was very much meant to be something that could be adopted and adapted to the ASC kinds of markets, where maybe you don't need all 4 arms. You might have 3 arms, or being able to leverage that same product into the ASCs, maybe lower acuity types of cases, and maybe they don't need the advanced vessel sealing or stapling products, but still a product that could be adapted towards those additional markets.
And Evelyn, going into the ASCs, you've got a specialization in that area around that. And how do surgeons view the use of robotics? The same surgeon think about it when she's in a hospital or an outpatient or an ASC.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So when you think about the entire population of surgeons, they're definitely not a homogeneous population. There are definitely different segments within that. And when you think about scaling up, it's not the same as starting up. And where we are in the technology adoption curve is that I think we've won over the early adopters and the innovators. And these surgeons are inherently much more comfortable and open to using robotics than those who have yet to adopt robotics. And so if we want to think about winning over the early and late majority, we need to think about servicing these potential customer sets who will be using and view robotics in a very different way from the current customer base. I think some of the perceptions that we have heard from surgeons about using robotics is that robotics can lead to longer procedure time, longer setup time, which affects the procedure efficiency. It can lead to a higher cost, which of course affects the business economic success of their practice. And some of them even believe that it can lead to an erosion of their surgical skills, which we all know surgeons really pride themselves on. I'm sure many of you here, myself included, and my fellow panelists, of course, are great believers in the power of robotics. But we have to recognize that this sentiment is not necessarily shared by all surgeons and their staff. I'm sure, all of us here can think of at least 1 or 2 surgeons who think of themselves as like Dr. Strange. They have a really high ability, great regarding ability of their hands. And so when we want to scale up in the market, we have to think about addressing some of these perceptions. But really, regardless of where surgeons stand in robotics right now, generally speaking, all surgeons do view robotics as the way of the future, because they believe that technological improvements will ultimately allow robotics to always deliver better patient outcomes.
Intuitive has done a very sort of clever and had the time to do this, and I just want to toss this out because it comes into play. They've built both a technological moat and financial moat, especially with the major trend in leasing. So the cohort we're selling to right now in ASCs is different than an institutionalized buyer. And Mike, I'll start with you, I guess, on this one. How should we be thinking about, as a community, putting soft tissue robots into an ASC, consider the future of financing that and placing those robots?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question. I think you're right that especially for early stage robotics companies, not Medtronic, we're not going to have the margins out of the gate that an Intuitive has. So they have a lot of pricing capability to be able to leverage there. But I think you have to be creative, and there are different ways to do that. And for example, in the Medtronic case, we do have instruments across the board, open laparoscopic and robotic, that we might be able to bundle in a certain way and be able to offer to customers that maybe Medtronic can't, in offering similar performance across those platforms with those instruments. So we just have to figure out a different way to compete, maybe and try and match some of those business models that Intuitive is pioneering. But we've got to find the right niche and the right product offering for those markets.
Scott, on the same point that Mike just made, we have to figure out a way to compete. How many different ways are there to compete? Finance, outcomes, patient selection?
I go back to what we started using the term digital surgery at Verb Surgical across all these things. And I just view robotics as one part of improving surgery. It's like, how do we democratize surgery around the world to improve outcomes, equalize performance at low cost? And robotics are part of that solution to scale into that. And again, I go back to my comments about sports cars and off-road vehicles. I think you can compete on having a portfolio of robots to say, hey, I've got this like $30,000 ventral hernia robot, or I've got this, $30,000 this robot, and you only need these two instruments to do this procedure. That's easier to adopt for hospitals around the world. You go to the presentation Intuitive made this morning, and you project 25 years forward, where are surgeries going to be done volume-wise, and where's the population growth? And we need to make these solutions more economical and more adaptable. Also, with a connected platform, we're going to have remote surgery that's going to happen in the next 20 years. So there's all of these different, between data, between training, between product, between bundling, which, a J&J, who bought, Verb and Medtronic, we have the biggest portfolios by far of procedural surgery based. So back to my Volcano days, anyone coming in, they may have a little better IVUS product than Volcano did, but we had 20 different products and use 8 of them, and here's your free Volcano system. At Verb, the plan was, hey, use $6 million of instruments, here's your free 8 robots. The margin was still 70% plus. I'm sure their model can be the same. So that's a whole different way to compete with Intuitive, and to the numbers that were shown. I mean, market penetration is still, 15% in the US? Like outside the US, much lower. In Europe, much lower. Other places. We're in the early beginning of democratizing surgery performance-wise around the world. And it's going to take all of those and more different ways to make it a reality, in my view.
Greg, as you position Distalmotion to be one of the earlier soft tissue robotic systems that will be selling into ASC, as well as hospitals, but staying on that ASC model and the stratification, what are you thinking about as a leader there? What do you think about as a platform company? And then what's going to make you attractive from one of the big strategics that might be able to come in and pick up a Distalmotion?
Well, first I'll say we're building the business for us. So,
I'm selling you already, don't worry about it.
I know, I do appreciate that. But, for us, we were very intentional, and this is before me. Our founder, Michael Frederick, was very intentional about saying no. And one of the lessons I learned actually in my last role was you cannot be the master of everything. So to enter the market and expect that you can master robotics, instrumentation, now visualization and advanced visualization, data and AI, telepresence, telesurgery, I mean, it's an impossibility for Distalmotion. So what we chose to do was build an open platform. So we're going to master, and I always say it's very difficult to make something so complex very simple, but we've tried to simplify our platform for ease of adoption, to adopt this platform into a site of care. But really, the gist of it is to be open. So we're allowing surgeons to choose their visualization technology. We don't think we're going to be better than Stryker or Storz or Olympus in that category. Obviously, ICG, multispectral imaging, there's so many tails there. We don't expect we're going to build a better stapler than J&J or Medtronic, energy devices. So we think that part of the solution is choice. Allowing, building a platform that you can use, you can justify, so it's not an anvil to a nail. It makes sense to use it in these lower acuity cases, and giving the surgeons the ability to choose what they feel is best for their patients at that particular site of care.
Well, I'm curious about your opinion on this one. Wonder what you're thinking. So you've spent a lot of time in the ASCs, and you've solicited the owners, the PE firms, and the work teams that decide which vehicle they want to drive. Yeah. Who influences those decisions? Obviously not in every ASC, but in general, that the manufacturers are not really paying attention to.
Yeah. So right now, about 2/3 of ASCs do not have an orthopedic robot. So really, that means there's an opportunity for Strategic to take the market leadership position. And surgeons right now, they're operating across 2 to 3 settings, right? One in an inpatient setting, and then another time in an outpatient, whether or not it's HOPD or an ASC setting. So this same surgeon with access and good exposure to a particular robot or robotic brand in an inpatient setting will have a higher propensity and a really good impression of the same robot or robotic brand in an outpatient setting. The question is if he or she can make the economics work, and if the Strategic can come up with an innovative business model that reduces or shares that high capital costs. And so to your question about who makes the decisions, right now in an ASC, it's normally the older surgeons, the ones who bring in all the business, and to a certain extent, some PE companies, because PE companies are now coming into the arena and they're buying up a lot of the ASCs, like M-Surg is one of them that just got bought up by a PE company. But that being said about the older surgeons having the influence, it is really promising to note that it's the younger surgeons that, generally speaking, that are the most enthusiastic and optimistic about surgeries being supported by robotics, whether or not it's orthopedics or general surgery. And although this younger cohort right now is still the minority compared to the entire population of surgeons, and as of right now still do not have the influence and buying power within the ASC, that's all going to change very quickly in the next 5 to 10 years. And then if you consider all the incoming cohorts or surgeons who are going to be graduating, you're going to see this group of robotic enthusiasts forming a much larger part of the market space. And these younger cohorts of surgeons think very differently about robots than the older cohorts. And so companies really need to think about how these younger surgeons think about their mindsets and how they go about with their buying decisions of robots, and think about also investing in brand loyalty right now. I mean, the reason why advertisers spend so much advertising to 18 to 35-year-olds is not because these customers spend more than the 35 to 55-year-olds, but it's because they inherently understand that brand loyalty and brand preferences are often nurtured from a younger age.
So on that lifetime value of a customer, right? An LVC model, we always want to think about that in any brand. You drive a Mercedes, an Audi, BMW luxury car, just an example. They want to keep you in that vehicle as long as possible. With that, the form factors are going to change. And Scott, the lessons you learned or insights you learned at Verb, do you forecast a rapid adoption of changing form factors down to these smaller robots that may be procedurally specific and the clinicians' ability to adopt those as standard of care?
No. I think probably the thing I'm most frustrated in my 30-year career is that in medical devices, things don't just take twice as long, they take 3 times as long as you'd like them to take. And that's the reality that we have to face. We may say we know it's the right thing, it just takes a lot longer to get through, whether it's regulatory, clinical, product development, market adoption. So I can see the future in 20 years and what it's going to be. It'll have its ups and downs to get to there with application-specific, connected, robots with more specific tools and better form factors over time would be my prediction. And I think that has to be taken into account relative to the venture investing that's taken place, where there was this mad rush and probably overfunding of robots. When you consider, really the clinical benefit, the cost, and the accessibility, didn't really match the amount of capital that was being put into the space. And And now I think we're getting into a more realistic view on timing of adoption and the real clinical benefits of these products.
Mike, when you think about developing a robot and it defending a position such as the endo tools that you have, some of that's a defensive play, some of it's opportunistic. How does Medtronic think about satiating the emerging market of roboticists if you're not a digital native per se, respectively?
Well, that's a big question, Joe.
That's why they call me.
I gave it to you.
Yeah, that's
Big minds, big
that's a tough one. So maybe I'll answer it in this way. I think if I look out 10 or 20 years, I think there'll be a significant consolidation of all these players into a few big ones that will offer multiple products and applications across a variety of fields. But there'll still be those niches that are out there, including, I think, what you're implying, maybe the opportunities in countries that don't have as much spend on healthcare, or in rural hospitals here in the U.S., or maybe even in ambulatory surgical centers where cost is more critical, that there'll still be an opportunity to meet a specific need. I don't know if that might be, sort of hybrid systems like a digital Distalmotion, where they're going to do some of the procedure laparoscopically, and they're going to do some of it robotically, and maybe be able to remove a surgical assistant. But thinking of unique solutions to fit those needs of those markets, I think for us as Medtronic, we'll try and capture as much as we can with a platform that we intend to build on. But we're not going to be able to meet everybody's needs in all cases.
Greg, when you're navigating where you're heading now with Distalmotion, what do you see as the largest barrier right now, technology or finances?
Yes. I may have gotten a harder question. At least I didn't have to decipher what the words were. Yeah, I mean, I think both are barriers, but I would say, honestly, the reason that robotics isn't, through low acuity cases, and as Scott said, and penetration is 10 to 15%, and outside the U.S. it's much, much lower in these, general surgery, gynecology, some of these markets is price. I mean, don't be fooled. I mean, it's that anvil to a nail, as I said earlier. You can't justify the cost for the benefit. So, I mean, we talk about the definition of robotics, and I would say we have the luxury at Distalmotion. You can do the surgery fully robotically. You can put the mesh in with a straight stick if you want on a hernia. But the benefit is wristed instruments, right? So the suturing, dissection, and working in confined space on any robot that's a huge value to a surgeon. There is no question. And that, I think that understanding in the marketplace, and especially now, when you talk about fellows and residents coming out, there are people that don't even know how to do laparoscopic surgery, right? To do a hernia, they need a robot. So I would say we have to lower the barrier financially. I mean, again, if you look at the current market players, the cost is only going up. I mean, right? The next model is a 20% premium. So there's got to be some segmentation, as this talk is called. We have to have segmentation in this market, because the adoption is going to come, and it can't come at the sake of, profit for a business or to really in the long run hurt the patient, right? Economically hurt the patient. So we've got to have a balance, and I think we're getting there. One other comment, I do agree with Scott. One of the things that I learned, over the past 6 or 7 years is utilization and actually being able to use the tool on a broad basis is really, really important. So when you think about some of these nichier products, and again, they have to solve huge clinical problems, in my opinion, to justify ROI. Even if it's a $30,000 or $40,000 device, they have to solve a huge clinical problem, maybe rather than, other tools that go across that robotic spectrum.
Scott, you first, and Evelyn, your opinion on this. The innovation on the robotics side always comes external from the large strategics. The large strategics are great at distribution support, sort of service, sales, et cetera. Is the build to buy model one that is gaining traction in medtech finally, as it is in biotech? And is that a pathway forward to address the stratification issue?
Yeah, that's a non-robotics question. Is that the intention? Yeah. Okay, because absolutely. I mean, the verb surgical is a perfect example. Like, you can all read about it publicly now. Joe sent me the nice, Bloomberg Law summary of the J&J verb Oris stuff. But the idea that in 4 years you could have verb build a robot that was on schedule to have a CE mark, that wouldn't have been possible to do within a J&J environment. Now, within a J&J environment, you're back under all of those legal, regulatory challenges that have just kept pushing, timelines out. But, I'm on the board of Varinex. A big whole, part of our thesis is that, the Medtronics, the J&Js, all of them have incredible balance sheets, but they all have EPS objectives on their income statements and limitations. So they'd like to do more, that they could put more into their engine. So, hey, how can I do organic growth, inorganic growth, or off-balance sheet transactions of build to buy for a specific application? And so I'm involved in 2 other ones where large strategics and VCs have put, upwards of $150 million. There's an option for the strategic to buy it after 4 years when you get regulatory approval at $600 million. And, it's a perfect, working model because you can have that kind of entrepreneurship focus of a startup team that's done it before. And then you're delivering a product exactly what that strategic wants to fit into their channel. And that could be anything from a regulatory trial, a product extension, or a whole new product category. So I see it as a huge opportunity for, Medtronics, the Strykers, the J&J, all the Bostons, et cetera, to just go faster. It's another lever to pull and leverage their balance sheet in order to do it.
Yeah, and I bring it up in the robotics because I don't think there's a category that has a more massive requirement of finances in order to get a product over the line into clinical use. Where if I'm using a PFA catheter, it's not quite the lift nor the burden. Evelyn, thoughts on that subject?
Yeah, having done quite a few due diligences for strategics and just having observed the market, we think that strategics will continue to have their own robotics programs, but still keep an eye and ears really close to the ground for interesting technologies or companies that can augment or supplement their existing portfolio. I think another point here I wanted to raise was that, procedures have been moving from the high acuity inpatient settings to the low acuity HOPD ASC settings for the last number of years. And in fact, the ASC share of procedures has doubled over the last 5 years. And in the really near future, it's expected that the ASC will become the site of care for the majority of orthopedic procedures. So strategics are thinking about robotics, not just a way for them to gain revenues through the sale of the robot itself across the different acuity settings, but from the associated implant and consumable as well. Like if you ask your surgeon if access to a particular robot impacts their choice of implant, the answer is probably going to be no. However, once the robot is actually placed in a certain setting, the surgeon's impressions and openness to the associated implant increases. And what we're seeing is that on average, practices with a certain robot increase their usage share of that associated implant substantially. And so robotics and the implants are really living in the same ecosystem. And so we think that strategics will continue investing in robotics for them to defend their share in robotics, but also in the associated implant and consumable space.
Mike, we got to get that stapler going on Hugo if that's the case.
I mean, I could talk a little about just innovation in general, because I totally agree that usually external innovation can go a lot faster than within an organization like Medtronic. And we have our ventures group and other relationships that help accelerate some of those things. But there's also a big challenge in integrating it into a robot. And I think Scott was alluding a little bit to this, that, from a regulatory standpoint and from a V&V, I mean, robots, unbelievably complicated. It's not, as you were talking about, a PFA ablation catheter or something. You got all the software, you've got all of the hardware, and it can be incredibly difficult. And I think the group that kind of figures that out, and of course we're trying to push to do this, but figures out that systems engineering, that systems integration capability to accept third-party innovation and build it onto a robot and be able to do that verification, validation, get the regulatory approvals, could really accelerate their offering in the marketplace. I think one of the things that might be more along the lines of that kind of innovation is really on things like visualization and on the digital platforms, software-related things that can be, in theory, integrated a little bit faster. Software is still very complicated to test, but I think those are some of the opportunities that you can really accelerate and build off of a hardware platform.
Let's go to the business model for a second here. Now let's go to ASCs in particular. We've got them owned by PE firms, surgeons, and even let's call it hospitals as well. And it's a different selling model. I think Scott touched on it earlier. It's a different supply chain model, or Greg, you might have. And are the robotic companies set up today, or the business models set up today, who sell to an institution, now ready to sell to a decentralized provider network? And then what does that future look like when I'm in Open Zipper, Iowa with an ASC, and I've got single use, and I've got to supply that and keep those cases running? So Greg, you're going to have to solve that sooner than later.
Yeah, so we're starting with single use for this very reason, but over the next year and a half, we'll have optionality in reusable. And again, all based on site of care. I think funny enough, the biggest learning I have is from orthopedics, because it's great to get a robot in. The amount of instrumentation that comes along with that robot, and if you're in the middle of Iowa and you have a premium brand knee system, it's very difficult. I know every company is looking at offsite sterilization, how logistically you can move in and out instruments. And again, our methodology is simple. Keep it very simple. We have 5 instruments. We've done 1,000 surgeries in Europe, over 35 different types of procedures, low and high acuity. We don't need much more. So again, when you have that philosophy, it doesn't matter if the account's in Tibet or Iowa, we can service them all. Then it just becomes economics, if you can delight them clinically. So logistics, when I say logistics, I mean instrumentation logistics and all the things that are needed to serve that robot. You have to consider what the sterilization capabilities are in those hospitals, or I should say alternative sites of care, and then you have to match them. They're not going to put in a massive sterilizer to adopt a robot, right? So again, is everyone there yet? Absolutely not. There's a lot of technologies that are just not there. And if you talk about anybody that's adopted robotics, one of the biggest costs outside of the acquisition of the robot is the inventory. So if you have 5 robots and you need 15, 20 sets of instruments and every set has 4 instruments times 15 uses, you can do the math on what that would cost to hold that type of inventory. So that's impossible at an ASC. They can't do that. The business model doesn't support it.
So what is the answer? Because that's going to be critical to the adoption of these, Scott.
Consignment and raise more capital. But he's trust to raise $150 million. That's right. Right?
Yeah.
You're going to figure out consignment and pricing models, or volume discounts, and that's...
Yeah, if I could just raise a point here. So having worked with some global logistics healthcare companies, that they are very well aware of this unmet need, and also, of course, this business opportunity for them. So they are thinking about developing a network of localized inventory and management centers that service not just the ASCs, but all the healthcare facilities in that localized area, and providing even just-in-time delivery for perhaps single-use products even. The question is if they can do all this inventory management and delivery in a really accountable way, whether it's through blockchain technology or what it is, and also be able to deliver it in a cost-efficient manner. So it's definitely something that they are working on, and possibly this inventory and management responsibility could be solved for by a new entrant.
Mike, you have to address that when you're coming out with Hugo and intention is to get to ASCs.
Yeah, obviously we're focused really on significant acute care hospitals now. But I think as we think down the road, I think there's certainly the logistics has been spoken to, but I think that there's also a technical solution for things like training, simulation, other things that you typically see a sales rep or other clinical specialists that are present typically in hospitals today are going to have to be taken over, I think, by some of these other technical types of solutions, telepresence, these simulation things that you don't have to have somebody physically on location in the middle of Iowa every single time to support. So I think there's going to be an evolution and a development of some technical solutions as well.
Maybe adding to that, one frustration that I've had in this whole area relative to adoption and democratization is, if you look at Verb, like I wanted to create a Switzerland platform. Google said, great, let's create a Switzerland digital platform that can make all these devices, whether it's, Charlie's over there for the whole storage imaging, Stryker imaging, the robot, up to the cloud, surgical training, telepresence, whatever it might be. But everybody kind of wants their own version of that. So then I went to digital surgery, which these guys bought. Then they said, okay, well, that didn't work because they bought it. Now we still don't have a Switzerland platform. Now I'm at Proximie, and the challenge is the hospital doesn't want to buy it because they don't want the added cost. The vendor doesn't want to buy it because they don't want the other. But you need it to drive this vision that we're all talking about. That's one of the things that we got to figure out. Now, I like your model because you're open platform and you're working with Proximie, so I like that.
I was going to say that if you didn't.
Oh, go ahead. But how did you get to the decision to work with them? And now we're in further discussions with multiple strategics, as a Switzerland platform to drive a lot of those training, telepresence, OR efficiencies, et cetera, apps on a platform with an open platform. But
yeah, so I'm going to say a couple things. Number one, I'll go back to the master of everything. You can't master everything, so part of our strategy is partnership, of which we inked a deal with Proximie in December. But what it does for us, you just said it, it allows us to be in every OR. So we can now we can not only from a sales and marketing perspective can we have people see what we're doing, but we can also teach and train. We can have virtual proctoring. But that really is, in my opinion, not the sauce. The sauce is now we have a data infrastructure, we have cloud-based services, and we can go from high touch, which robotics right now, most companies are very high touch, meaning rep in the room, almost on every case. And with technologies or platforms like Proximie, the idea is you can have a cockpit to do it. So, we Distalmotion, it's not a sustainable business model to put a rep in every case. That doesn't make any sense at all for us. So we're really focused on this high touch to low touch model where now we can get the benefit of technology and still delight the customer and serve the customer in the way that they expect.
Going down the panel, Evelyn, starting with you, what are the unlocks over the next 5 years in the stratification, and what are the major barriers that are going to have you worried?
Glad you got it.
Yeah.
We're all going to get it, but she got it first. Yeah. While she thinks about it, is there anybody else who wants to jump on that?
Yeah, I think there are no silver bullets. There's a lot of individual things that, and when you add them together, make a difference. So I'll be self-promoting with another company I'm involved with and on the board, on target. So, okay, we want to move to minimally invasive lung surgery. They talked about lung surgery this morning, intuitive. Now I move to VATS and a robot. Well, now I can't palpate. So now what I do? Now I've got, a huge unmet need. I can identify through visualization where these lesions are actually at, and I can have boundaries, and now I can make that a reality. So as we tackle each of these, they're going to have their own challenges to make that surgery faster, better, cheaper. And the robotics are going to be a part of it. A digital platform and learning and training is going to be a part of it. Imaging agents, I think, are going to be a huge multi-billion-dollar part of that as well. But we got to solve some of this economics, and I believe that a big part of that is J&J getting in the market with a robot, Medtronic getting to a robot, having bundled deals where you saw what happened, like Cordis selling $4,000 or $5,000 drug-eluting stents. Now what's a drug-eluting stent cost for when there's 8 competitors and everything else? They're under $1,000. Edwards, first percutaneous valves. Now we have 3 or 4. But Intuitive has not had to have any competition. So go Medtronic, go J&J, get your robots out, and I think it'll be better for patients because it's going to become more accessible.
Mike, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think I agree with a lot of what Scott is saying. I think that the idea over the next 5 years is really finding those things that are being identified and being able to incorporate them into a platform. I don't work for Intuitive, but what I took away from the Gen 5 innovation or launch was actually sticking to the same platform. They made it easier to use. I think there'll probably be, there's probably a bunch of stuff that's embedded in there that can be turned on and off. That might be one way to offer to different markets. You turn on and off features, allow people to select what things and how much they want to spend for some of that capability. But they can incorporate, or we can incorporate some of that same capability, whether it's an on-target, multispectral visualization system, some other kinds of tools that might be helpful.
Proximity platform.
Other solutions like that can be integrated to make it fit as many needs as we can. But the barrier, I guess the second part of your question, again, I think is the regulatory part. And again, I don't work for Intuitive, but I think the fact that they use pretty much the same platform, tweaked it, helped accelerate their regulatory approval, right? And they got approval for all indications right away. And so I think that I don't think you're going to see big platform changes over time. I think you'll see incorporating around the edges.
Evelyn?
Yeah, so I agree with my fellow panelists. And I think one thing that companies need to think about is not just like the clinical value of the product itself, but also how the surgeon thinks about themselves and how a surgeon defines a successful surgeon. Because their top 3 priorities are pretty much always the same. Like they want to grow their business, they want to have an incredible reputation in the community that they're working with, and they want to have great patient outcomes, whether or not it's through robotics or whether it's through conventional methods. And so when companies think about approaching them, they need to think about how their robotic solutions actually match up against their top 3 priorities. And addressing these gaps would help to accelerate the growth.
Greg, you get the last word.
Yeah, so I'm not going to repeat. They're all great points. I think the one that wasn't mentioned is this data privacy, cybersecurity element. So as soon as you connect a device, there's a whole different element of approvals and the ability to integrate within a hospital. So to me, that is going to be probably a big limiter to speed, because the smarter a device is, the more conclusions that it will draw for you. I mean, there's lines in the sand that when it starts to really assist with that outcome. And again, if you look at some of the advanced visualization ICG, it's consultative right now. It's not, so again, the more we get into this digital surgery, as Scott mentioned earlier, I think the more difficult it's going to become. And I think we're going to have to work with the regulatory bodies to get them there. I mean, for all of us, I mean, I'm looking Medtronic and Distalmotion, we have to go out and get, multiple indications done to have, these big vertical approvals. So it is a barrier for any company entering certain markets to try and get done. So multifactorial there, but I think there's some work to be done to really clear the path to true innovation.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank my panel, but a big hand for the panel. Thanks.